Good morning, Copernicus. How was your day? How was your very long weekend? Okay, so now that the first quarter is over, it's expected that we start a new lesson. We'll start a new chapter in your special program in journalism subject. And that is, we'll begin with chapter 2. We're going to be talking about history. So please bear with me, do not sleep. Um, Try your best not to fall asleep because we're gonna be presenting uh, how the journalism that we know these days evolved, and then later on, we're gonna focus our discussion on print journalism in the Philippines. So we're gonna have the introduction to journalism. When we say journalism, what comes to your mind? I know that all of you have been part of your school papers way back in elementary. So I expect that you've been taught what journalism is, what to expect, what people do in journalism, and what makes journalism different from the other forms of communication. We'll start with Hazel. Hazel, can you kindly tell us something about journalism? Okay, thank you, Hazel. So, journalism is the art and science of writing for newspapers, periodicals, radio, television, and online publications. So, let's take out the keywords in this definition. Of course, you're not going to include the word journalism because that's what we're defining here. Let's start with art. Why is journalism considered an art? Uy, sumagot kayo. Okay, journalism is an art because it is a form of expression. Just like in your art subject, right? In your art subject, you express your feelings, you express your thoughts, you express your emotions, your ideas through a certain medium. And journalism is also a form of expression, right? So the medium may be different from your, say, visual arts, but still journalism can be considered as an art. Why is it considered a science? It says here journalism is the science of writing. What do you do in your science subjects? I mean, what makes science different from other subjects? When we say science, we're talking about process. We're talking about concepts. We're talking about ideas. And just like in experimentation or in your science subject, in research, in biology, in journalism, we follow a step-by-step process. Before you're able to produce something, you have to do several steps. You have to do several procedures, right? Okay, next, writing for newspapers, periodicals, radio, television, and online publication. So as you can see, there are several media in wherein you could express. I mean, where journalism can be expressed. So we have print, we have broadcast, and we have the web or the online publications. Next, it unfolds timely and factual reports of unusual or unexpected events, opinions, or situations that affect man and his environment. Take note of the underlined words. First, timely. Journalism is about timely events or experiences. It means they are not events or happenings that occurred long time ago. They are events that happened just recently. Otherwise, those events are part of history and not of journalism anymore. Next, journalism reveals or consists of factual reports. Journalism involves real happenings, real events, real people. If the characters or the events are made up, that's not journalism. That's literature. Next, unusual or unexpected events. What are the things that you do every day? That you see every day that other people do or hear or listen to every day. So if you write those things that you do like every hour, every minute, every second of every day, of every month, every year, that's not journalism. It's your diary. Unusual. For example, while Carl is on his way to school, he was bitten by a dog. Is it usual or unusual? It's usual, right? Because normally dogs bite man. However, let's let's reverse the event. Carl bit a dog. Is it unusual? Yes, it is, right? So you don't normally see people biting dogs unless they're eating them. So in that case, it's an unusual event. It's an unexpected event. Therefore, when you hear about it, that's journalism. But make sure it's based on factual reports. I mean, on factual happenings. Opinions are situations that affect man and his environment. An event that affects man and his environment that could be a subject for journalism. Okay, let's talk about the etymology of journalism. Journalism comes from the word journal, and journal came from the Latin word diurnal, which means daily. Take note, journal, that's why when you are writing your journals, it's about daily events or things that happened in your life for a certain period of time. So, journal from the Latin word diurnal, which means daily. Okay. Journalism started in ancient Egypt when heralds ran to pharaohs with oral reports and when town criers sang important announcements in public places. So it started in ancient Egypt. How many of you are familiar with pharaohs. Okay. Or say ruler of Egypt. So heralds, what do you mean by heralds? These are messengers. So during that time, in ancient Egypt, they had the messengers who go to the pharaoh and give oral report. In our time, we can call them the chismoso, not really chismoso or chismosa, because they deliver real reports. However, the manner is oral. And then town criers sang important announcements in public places. So town criers, which means these are people who went all over the town, maybe shouting or informing everyone of important announcements. For example, it's the pharaoh's birthday, and the pharaoh is going to have a party in his palace. So the town criers go around and say, it's the pharaoh's birthday. Everyone's invited, but make sure you have gifts like that. So that's the job of the town criers during the time of ancient Egypt. So there were two kinds of people delivering reports. One are the heralds reporting directly to the pharaoh, and the town criers reporting to the public or to the common people. In the Philippine history, we have this kind of people or job in the barangay, for example, just like the datu or the raha has something important to say or to report to the public. There's this man who goes around the town shouting the announcement, and that's so what we call those town criers in the Philippines during the pre-Hispanic period. We call them umalahokan. Okay, good. Next. So from Egypt, we go to Rome. So around 130 BC, brief reports were called acta diurna, which means daily events. Take note, acta diurna. So diurna or diurnal, as what we learned earlier, means daily, and acta means events. They were carved in stones and put up in public places. Others were called acta publica, which means public events. Take note, acta means event. And then publica, public, that's very easy. Take note of the two terms. In ancient Rome, acta diurna, which means daily events, and acta publica, which means public events. Around the same time in China, the Chinese government sent out messages called Dibao, meaning government report to local governors, people who are in charge of an area. Oh, the local governors are the people who were in charge in a certain area. That's Dibao. Dibao, it's not the city or the place where President Duterte came from or comes from. It's Davao. This one is Dibao. Ah ha ha ha, ang corny. Okay, next. The first printed newspaper appeared in Beijing, China in the 7th and 8th centuries. Take note, printed newspaper is enclosed and single quotation marks because those first printed newspapers actually were not printed in real paper that we know nowadays. So the first printed newspaper that appeared in Beijing, China in the 7th and 8th centuries were actually in wood blocks. Okay, it's those newspapers were printed in wood blocks. Next, in 1439, the printing press was introduced, and however, it was only in 1450 when Johann Gutenberg or Johannes Gutenberg of Mainz, Germany invented the movable printing press. Take note of the difference. In 1439, printing press. So maybe it was the printing press was like situated in only one location, and printing could take a lot of time before one book or one newspaper is produced. However, in 1450, the movable printing press was invented, thus making production more efficient, the production bigger as compared to that of 1939. A copy of the Bible was the first book printed in the movable printing press. In Europe, in the 1620s, people wrote single-page newsletters called Corantos. Corantos. These were writings about wars and other interesting news. Okay, because during this time, war was really an event that affects a lot of people. In England, in 1644, John Milton, a famous poet, wrote and published Areopagitica. So this one is a speech collection that called for freedom of the press. So Corantos, single-page newsletter in Europe, while in England, you have John Milton, Areopagitica, Pahitica, called for freedom of the press. In 1666, the London Gazette was the first English newspaper that was published. The London Gazette is also known as the Oxford Gazette. On September 25, 1690, you have there Benjamin Harris, who published Public Occurrences, both foreign and domestic, and that was in Boston, Massachusetts. If you notice, public is with the K and domestic is with the K, because during this time, English was basically from England, so it was brought to the U.S. So since this is Old English, they used K for domestic and K for public. Take note, 1690, Public Occurrences, both foreign and domestic, by Benjamin Harris. In 1783, the Daily Advertisers and the Pennsylvania Evening Post were considered as the first American daily newspapers. First American daily newspapers. Okay. You might be wondering, 1690, Public Occurrences, both foreign and domestic. 1783, Daily Advertisers and Pennsylvania Evening Post. Why are these two considered as the first daily American newspapers? Was the Public Occurrences not published daily? Most probably. Because Public Occurrences did not last that long. I think it ceased publication after 6 months or 14 months. Well, next. The Gentleman's Magazine was the first periodical to use the word magazine. It was published in 1731 to 1907. Gentleman's Magazine. So, from the name alone, from the name of the magazine alone, what do you think were the topics or the subjects of the articles printed in this publication, in this magazine? Okay, actually they used the word magazine to mean something to entertain. Okay, the word magazine was initially used to mean a form of entertainment. So what do you think are the usual topics of the magazine? Okay. It contained political essays, poems, poetries, stories, debates, and was very influential. Okay. Debates and stories and political essays and poems. During those times, people were entertained reading or listening to stories about the under these topics. Unlike nowadays, right? So if you notice, the topics are more of intellectual, intellectual things. So people were entertained by these things before, unlike nowadays. So going back, the Gentleman's Magazine was a huge influence to American Magazine and General Magazine and Historical Chronicle of Benjamin Franklin. So Andrew Bradford published American Magazine, while Benjamin Franklin published General Magazine and Historical Chronicle. They're both Americans. They're both Americans. So there you go. There you have the history of a brief history of journalism in the world. So I want you to go over your notes if you were able to take down notes while I was presenting the lesson, and then later on I'm giving you 5 minutes for that, and then I'll give you your quiz. So be honest, do not cheat. I'll give you enough time to prepare for the quiz. So that's all.